So let me just finish by saying to you this, that if you're going to think about your country and try to make sense of it, what would those roots look like? Well, you have to look at Aboriginal philosophical concepts. Complexity. This is a country based on complexity, the opposite of the European US approach towards the nation state. It's a First Nations idea of multiple civilizations, multiple nations, living side by side, quite different to each other, similar and different, and finding ways, with problems, of living together without eliminating differences, living with complexity. Richard Attlee, the father of the new national chief, has written a very interesting book called Tsawak. And Tsawak, it's a Hausik term, which he explains as basically all is one. In other words, it's a way of putting complexity together into one piece. It's a holistic or a spatial approach as opposed to a linear, rational approach. It's a very interesting philosophy, extremely useful to a country like this, a civilization like this. The return in real force of the Metis people is very interesting because it's, for us, there's a model of complexity which says to us that it's possible to have a civilization in complexity. You don't have to have riots in the suburbs of Paris because there are a couple of Muslims around, because they're getting in the way of your simplicity, of your pure model. They're getting in the way of the way you imagine yourself. So you can say, gosh, isn't that great? We can have complexity. We've proved we can have complexity because one of the founding, if you like, peoples of this country are the Metis people who stand, and they've come through a hell of a lot, who stand as an example of the possibility of living with complexity. Secondly, non-monolithic. The Western nation state is a monolithic model. This country is a non-monolithic model. That's an idea which comes entirely from the First Nations, of minorities living together, a civilization of minorities. We've always been a civilization of minorities. I mean, you say, well, the people who speak English are the majority. Yeah, but I mean, try to get the people who speak English to agree on anything. Right? That's because we're not a single group. We're all sorts of very, very different groups. So we are a civilization of minorities. There's a sickness, multiple personality disorder. I mean, Canada is a multiple personality order. That's what's interesting. Negotiation. We're a civilization that adores to negotiate. We negotiate the whole time. As long as you're negotiating, you're not killing each other. Where does that come from? It's not rational. It's not linear. It's not problem solving. It's an Aboriginal idea. It has to do with a lot of long speeches and a lot of negotiations going on forever. And that's how you figure out how to live together. Where does that come from? First Nations, Aboriginal. It's not Western. It's not European. All of our treaties were based on that. Clément Chartier, the elected head of the Metis people, says that given a choice between litigation or negotiation, we've always wanted negotiation. Go read, George Erasmus's Royal Commission, a fantastic document. And it's all about the history of learning how to live with complexity, non-monolithic, and negotiation. Fourth, Western civilization is all about a battle between individualism on the one hand and group interests on the other. That's the history of Western civilization. Canada's all about putting the two things together and living with a kind of interesting tension of balance between individualism and group interests. When Pierre Trudeau introduced the Charter of Rights, he introduced it as a European charter, a defense of the European liberal 19th century idea of the individual, defense of individualism. And then he had to submit it to Canadian political system, which is you. And we shoved in all these group interests into the Constitution and the Charter. So today we have, in our Constitution and our Charter, absolute protection for individual rights and absolute protection for group rights. And absolutely nothing that explains how they go together. And it works. Why does it work? Because for thousands of years, the Aboriginal principle was a balance between the concept of the group and the concept of the celebration of the individual. It works pretty well together if you're willing to accept that philosophical leap into a different territory. And that's where you get the ideas of egalitarianism in Canada. One of the most important phrases or terms in Canadian history, perhaps the single most important term, is one which you'll find right across the country in slightly different forms in different nations, but it's in virtually every treaty, directly or indirectly, and it's the concept of the common goal. common bowl and spoon. I mean, I forget, there's a Nishka version of it. It's implicit in the Great Peace of Montreal. There's always this concept, the long bowl, the bowl and spoon. We will all eat from the common bowl. We will all use the common bowl and spoon. And that is, you think, well, that sounds kind of corny. Well, it's no cornier than, any other philosophy. And it's really about egalitarianism and inclusion and sharing. Where does that come from? Where does single-tier healthcare come from? Where does the idea of, we don't like people who get too big for their boots in Canada? Well, it has some negative sides to it. But the positive side is that idea of egalitarianism. And then tied to that very closely is a civilization based on the concept of the circle, as opposed to a civilization based on the line, the linear, rational line, the European, US line, which goes ahead. Progress, solving problems. Well, progress solving problems has led us to, among other things, global warming. I mean, it has some advantages. It has many disadvantages. And this concept of the circle, which means you live with uncertainty, you're forced to live with each other, is a very interesting approach towards a civilization. And then finally, that idea I mentioned at the beginning about a very oral civilization. Aboriginal First Nations civilizations, Inuit civilizations were oral. The people who came in the beginning, the Scots and the French Canadians, were oral because they didn't read or write, most of them, but they basically came from oral civilizations, pre-Enlightenment civilizations. And the wave after wave of immigrants who come here have basically been oral. They've been oral either because they didn't read or write, or because they didn't speak English or French. And so the way in which Canadians have actually dealt with each other has continued to be the way in which Aboriginals dealt with each other, which is to say oral. And even today, we take 1% of our population a year in immigrants. I mean, no other country does that. I'm for it, but no other country does that. I mean, 85% of the 300,000 who come are citizens within 4 to 5 years. In the United States, it's 40%. In Europe, it's about 7%, and having a heart attack over it. Most of those people who come, English and French, are not their first languages. And so their relationship for at least one generation, they'll learn the languages, but their profound relationship with Canada through that whole first generation is oral. And an oral civilization is very different from a written civilization. Yes, to graduate from here, you got to write. I understand that. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the way in which we actually function as a civilization. We actually function as an oral civilization. And that's actually really interesting once you think about it. It doesn't make us better, it makes us interesting. It makes us particular to our place. We're trying to do something here which is different from what blocks the British and the French and the Americans. We've got a possibility if we actually embrace that difference, not because it's better, because it is somewhat different. So what I think all of this means is that we have to find a new way into strength, discovering and uncovering what we are, getting rid of the whitewash of the 1890s to the 1920s, revealing ourselves to ourselves. One part of that is that, this is a country built on 3 pillars, foundation of 3 pillars. It's a great big architectural construct with 3 pillars. And they're clearly Aboriginal, Francophone, and Anglophone. It's not about numbers. It's about the foundations. It's a spatial idea. It's a philosophical idea, but it has a reality. So we spent a lot of the last 50 years strengthening the Francophone pillar, because it needed to be strengthened, because we betrayed the Francophones in every possible way over about a 70-year period. And we've done pretty well, We've got 325,000 Anglophone kids in immersion schooling. We've done really pretty well. We've had a lot of trouble along the way, and we're still going to have trouble, but we've done well at getting French back to the place it needed to be in this country. And I see, young British Columbia Anglophones taking very interesting positions publicly because they speak 2 to 3 languages because of immersion schooling.